Hey everybody, today we're talking about Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths, the animated movie, Part 1. Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent, and today we're going to talk about a newer animated movie, Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths, Part 1. Yes, I said newer because it's not the latest. Part 2 came out last week. I haven't watched it yet, but I will, and I'll have a review up here shortly for you within the next week or so, depending on when this video releases. But Part 1, I believe, came out in like January. It was earlier this year. They're doing like, I think, one every 4 months or something like that. And that must be why, because Part 2 came out in April. But anyway, I watched it way back when, and I decided that it wasn't very good. And I decided not to review it, and honestly, I kind of forgot about it. So that when Part 2 came out and I got that one, having not watched it yet, I was like, man, I really need to rewatch Part 1. So I was rewatching Part 1 just to watch it, not thinking I was going to review it for the show, for the channel here. And I'm like, well, this is kind of, if we're going to talk about Part 2, we still need to talk about Part 1. Not because there's stuff to talk about, but just because it's like setting the table, set expectations. Because Part 1 is not very good. So this is one of 10 movies that they've done in the last 4 years, like this Tomorrowverse, as they call it, started in 2020 with Superman, Man of Tomorrow. I liked that movie. I thought the animation style was a little bit fresh at the time. But as we've gone on, I think they've gotten worse and worse. And I have reviews on the channel here for all of them, I believe. Some standouts, I believe Justice Society of America World War II was terrible. That's probably the best performing video recently on my channel because I lambasted that thing. And that was really bad. The Supergirl one I kind of liked. I'm not sure if there's a review for that on the channel or not. Green Lantern Beware My Power I thought was okay. And Justice League War World, again, was okay. They seem to have a pacing problem in these movies. And I don't know if it's the animation style. Like, the animation style is definitely basic. And I think they're saving money because all the designs are very basic. It's very slow. The pacing's very slow. Like, there's not a lot of action. And the music is very slow. So when you have all these, like, a basic animation with a lot of talking and some slow kind of meh music, it just slows the pacing down to a level where you're like, all right, or there's 50 minutes left in this thing, kill me now. So a lot of those movies do suffer from that. Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 of 3 definitely suffers from that. And I think Part 1 here surely suffers because they don't have it designed as a crisis story. They do, per se, but it's a 2 hour and a half long movie, and you spend the first 50 minutes, almost an hour, 50 minutes, half the movie's length, right, on a flash story of him going through time slipping for various reasons, to then get to the actual crisis of it all, where the Monitor shows up 50 minutes into an hour and a half long film, and then sets up other characters, the conflict, only to then have Barry, who's been time slipping, and you've seen beginning, middle, and old Barry the entire time. Now you're seeing that Barry decide that he's going to sacrifice himself for the crisis in Part 1. If you recall Crisis on Infinite Earths, this is my copy, Barry dies in issue 8, a long, long time after, like, everything has started. You know what the problem is. You know what the solution, not the solution, but you know the villains are. And Barry dies in this movie before we even meet the Anti-Monitor, much less know what's going on. Like, the only thing that's happening when Barry dies in the beginning of this film, and that's not a spoiler because this story is 38 years old this year, as I will be, everybody knows Barry dies in Infinite Crisis, or not Infinite, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, what a mouthful. But to have this version of the Flash of Barry die in the first third, I think it's going to do long-term damage to the story. And not just prolonging him throughout and keeping that as a oh my gosh, what's going to happen next moment, but the beginning moment of like, all right, we think the problem's solved, that kind of thing. And I think it's going to suffer from that. Also, at the same time, they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. Barry gets to live out a full life, even though he's recruited as a younger Barry, and somehow older Barry is the one who ends up sacrificing himself after living a full life with Iris that we've seen in all these flashbacks and stuff. And when they're doing that, it's like, well, there's no consequence anymore. Like, there's no real reason Barry needs to die. Not reason for him to die, but there's no sadness, there's no tragedy in it at all, because it's not a young man who sacrificed himself before he got the chance to have kids and all this stuff. Like, that old Barry in the movie got all those chances. So when he dies, it's not tragic. And that was the thing about Barry's death in the original Crisis, is that it was tragic. It was surprising to readers at the time, apparently. I don't know. I wasn't reading comics at the time. I was like, barely barely born. But here, there's no tragedy because you have a character who has had a beginning, middle, and end of his life. So it takes all the tragedy away from what is one of the most memorable moments of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It takes the tragedy away. Like, that's a storytelling no-no, I feel like. That should be, rule number one. So that sucks all the drama out of a movie that was already slow and plotting to begin with by spending so much time setting up Barry. And I guess maybe they were like, we want this to be Barry's story, but if you're going to have a part 1, part 2, part 3, then spread everything out, for crying out loud. You got Zack Snyder and Hunger Games doing this stuff for years and years and years. People are used to like a part 1, part 2, part 3 of movies. I feel like they're doing themselves a disservice by saying, oh, well, we need to have a single story around here. Like, if that's the case, then try and figure out how to make Crisis on Infinite Earths a longer film, maybe, or cut things out, or do it in the hour-and-a-half time span you have. I feel like if they had actually said, all right, we're going to maybe do 2 hours of animation and cram Crisis on Infinite Earths into 2 hours of animation, you could have had your big moments. You could have had a slam-bang, action-filled movie, but instead we're deciding to stretch it out and make changes that didn't really need to be made because they want this to be the end of their Tomorrowverse. And I was kind of thinking, like, why is this the end of their new universe? And then I realized that starting next year in 2025 is the beginning of James Gunn's DCU, or whatever they're called, the Gunverse, whatever you want to call it. With his Superman film, we're getting the Creature Commandos animated series. And if animation is going to tie into film, then we have to tie up this animated movie line that we have and, never really do anything with it again. So that's probably why they're wrapping up this universe, so that audiences don't get confused at some other later point. Now, I think they're also doing a Watchmen movie. So if that's removed from this universe, that's awesome. Like, please give me a different animation style, honestly. Give me a different producer, a different composer, a different director, because it's pretty clear that these people who have done these last 10 movies, although they've been very much okay in miss, not even hit or miss. Like, I don't think there's one that I actually really, really liked. Long Halloween, especially was like a huge miss for me. We need people who know how to tell an animated story. And that's what worked about the first set of these films before they started the universe in itself after Flashpoint Paradox. And then after they did this second universe here with these 10 movies. So I feel like the first two evolutions of the DC animated movies worked. And this one has just flat out failed, honestly. So there's things in here too that they're changing, like Supergirl is Harbinger. Why? For reasons, because we don't want to hire another actress. There's some of these things that are just like, you could have just made a new character. But like, Harbinger shows up in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and people are like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Harbinger. And it's like, okay, what do you do? I work for the Monitor. Okay, cool. And like, that's it. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason to do all these weird things. Because at the same time, you're still introducing the female Dr. Light. in giving her powers in this movie. For some reason, the Psycho Pirate is gathered with all of the heroes and doing things in that movie. Like, why is he there? The Spectre shows up at the end, having a conversation with the Monitor, and we're not really introduced to the Anti-Monitor. You're still introducing two Supermens who look exactly the same, except for some lines on the face to indicate one is older. Like, at least in Crisis on Infinite Earths, you had the two Supermen, and George Perez made sure that we knew who's who. One has gray temples, the other does not. One looks significantly older, the other does not. And then at the same time, from far away, you have the classic S shield that everybody knows and loves, and then you have the Earth 2 S shield where the S kind of connects down at the bottom of the chest, a la the Man of Steel. So there's all these things in this movie that I think are just missteps, right? So is part 2 going to be good? I don't know. Is there going to be a part 3? Yes. Is it going to be good? I don't know. It's just not looking good for this universe, and at the end of the day, I think I'm happy they're ending it so that we can move on and get some new blood in here and tell some fresh stories, hopefully with better producers, better animation, better music, and better pacing. Honestly, the pacing is the thing that kills these movies the most. If they would just pace these a little faster, I feel like they would be a little bit better. And that was one of the strengths of the older animated movies. They only had 70 minutes or 80 minutes, and they moved along at a quick pace. And then once they got to this one where they're, these last couple of movies in this universe have been an hour and a half, they've just dragged out. And it's like, yo, cut 20 minutes out of this thing, cut 10 minutes out of this thing. It'll move a lot quicker. It'll feel a lot better and a much better cohesive movie instead of these long scenes with this boring music and stale animation. So anyways, that's my thoughts on Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, the animated movie. A little bit late to the party, but we will now drudge our way through Part 2. Hopefully it's a little bit better, as it's supposed to be all Crisis stuff, but we'll see. They'll probably find a way to focus on one character and make it a complete story for that one character and completely dismantle the entire Crisis story at that point, the way they did with this one. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you thought of Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, the animated movie, down below in the comments. We will see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.